Hello and welcome to America Latina Story. Today we are going to talk about the importance of the little-known Rio Pilcomayo in the history of Latin America. In the 16th century, the Spanish crown established the Latin American dependencies of its empire in Central America and the north of South America. That came to be known as the Spanish Main. The jewel of these new viceroyalties was Peru, from where it extracted much of its income in gold and silver. However, the Spanish princes had to face very early on the problem of the conveyance of their treasures. Indeed, the most direct sea route to Spain started from what is now Panama to then cross the Caribbean Sea and its swarm of islands teeming with English, French, and Dutch pirates and privateers. So the Spaniards set out to find an alternative route to prevent their possessions from enriching their enemies. They launched expeditions towards the Atlantic coast of the continent, to the south of the Portuguese territories. Thus were founded Buenos Aires in the region of the Rio de la Plata, and going up the Rio Paraguay directly north inland for 1,000 kilometers, Asunción. It now remained for the conquistadors to reach Peru through unexplored territory. A muddy, marshy stream flowed into the Rio Paraguay near Asunción. It came from the northwest, where Bolivia and Peru stood. It bore the name Rio Pilcomayo. Thus began the long series of expeditions undertaken to explore this potential communication route and unite two parts of the Spanish Empire. The Rio Pilcomayo bars the South American continent in its middle from west to east. It is a giant of Latin America, a terrible character, unpredictable and with a troubled past, a stake in the lust of men and a fragile toy in their destructive hands. The Rio Pilcomayo takes its source at 4,200 meters of altitude in the Bolivian Altiplano in the Pampa Churroco. After a meandering course of 2,500 kilometers, it joins the Rio Paraguay by a marshy delta at the gate of Asunción. The Rio Pilcomayo is one of the most unpredictable rivers in South America. It irregularly alternates between droughts and floods, and its flow fluctuates much in magnitude within the same cycle. Its basin is 270,000 square kilometers, and 12 indigenous ethnic groups lived there. Pilcomayo in Quechua can mean the color red pilco, or a bird from the banks of the river named Pilcu, Mayo meaning a stream. The rio is also called in Guarani Araguay, or river of the parrots. The exploration of the Rio Pilcomayo did not begin in earnest until the beginning of the 18th century with Father Patiño. On August 14, 1721, at the head of 71 men divided into 3 boats, Father Patiño set out to go upstream in search of this famous route that would allow the Spaniards to reach Peru and its riches. A few days only after the departure, Father Patiño and his men had to turn back before the hostility of the Indians. His tentative was not entirely fruitless, for his name has been given to the vast area of inextricable swamps located to the north of the estuary that forms the river mouth before it flows into the Rio Paraguay. This attempt was followed in 1742 and 1743 by those of Father Castañares, who perished with all his men at the hands of the Tobas Indians during the second voyage. It then took a century to see two new expeditions leaving Bolivia in search of a navigable waterway for trade and goods to reach the Atlantic. These two expeditions, both commissioned by the Bolivian government, were that in 1844 of the Dutch Van Nievel, accompanied by 60 soldiers, and that of Gianelli in 1863 at the head of 50 soldiers. Both ended in disaster, each time because of the Indians. The Pilcomayo then formed the border of a wild territory under Indian control. This land was populated by many tribes, the fiercest being the Nakotois, Tobas, and Nimca, which considered neighbors and outsiders as outright enemies. For a long time, Argentina had to struggle to stabilize these territories. It is in this context that took place the scientific expedition of Dr. Jules Crevaux at the instigation of the Bolivian government. Dr. Crevaux was a seasoned and famous French explorer who had already traveled the northeast of the continent, notably the Orinoco River. He was also a pacifist who refused to use weapons against Indians. It is possible to think that he was not well aware of the warlike situation which reigned on the banks of the Pilcomayo when he undertook to descend it with 18 men, including the painter Rinzel, the doctor Bayol, and the astronomer Billet. Still, in April 1882, Crevaux and his companions entered the territory of the cannibalistic Tobas Indians, who took them prisoners and ate Crevaux and two of his companions, as we learned from two members of the expedition who were able to escape. It seems that Jules Crevaux and his men were victims of reprisal on the part of Indians who had just suffered the violence of a punitive expedition by an Argentine army corps. The Crevaux expedition was followed in 1883 by that heavily escorted of Dr. Daniel Campos, who managed to reach Asunción in a sad state after 3 months of terrible ordeals. Campos, having lost himself many times, was unable to say whether the Pilcomayo was navigable or not. During the same period, the Frenchman Arthur Thouars made several exploratory trips on the Rio, of which he drew a map, which he published in 1903. Argentina also commissioned several explorations. We will only cite the first two, that of Commander Fontana in 1882 and that of Colonel Ibaceta in 1883. These expeditions took place in a context of Indian wars that had nothing to envy by their ferocity to those of the North American western frontier. Both bore little fruit. The priority for the Argentine government then became the pacification of the region. Several punitive expeditions were sent to the area, notably that of Commander Gomensoro, famous for his habit of carrying in his campaigns the skulls of the enemies he had beheaded in previous encounters. These expeditions were followed by many more, most ending in disaster, their members wandering lost in the swamps, dying of thirst or hunger in the countless nooks and meanders of the river, committing suicide, or ending up victims of villainous assassinations. All these exploratory expeditions concluded that the Rio Pilcomayo was not navigable for commerce. But history had long ago left the need to join the viceroyalty of Peru to the Atlantic. Contemporary issues were different. It was in 1878 that, following an international arbitration, US President Hayes declared the Pilcomayo as the border between Argentina and Paraguay. However, it was not until the beginning of the 20th century that the southernmost arm of its estuary came to be recognized as marking this border. Thus ends the story of the exploration of the Rio Pilcomayo. On a parting note, today, if it remains untamed, the Rio Pilcomayo is at last conveying some sort of goods from the Andes to the southern parts of the continent, for it is saturated with minerals coming from the Bolivian islands: silver, arsenic, zinc, cadmium, mercury and lead, the last three being formidable toxins, some particles of which can be found in the water as far as the Rio de la Plata. Thank you for watching this program. Do not hesitate to subscribe to the channel. This is all for now. Goodbye.